the Final Four and One. We're going to update you on the Naismith watch list. As I told you last week, we're going to be doing a Naismith watch segment presented by Jersey Mike's every Friday, where we'll give you our top 3 candidates in this moment for Naismith National Player of the Year. David, I'll let you go first. If you were submitting a Naismith ballot today, what 3 names would you put at the top of your list?
Well, after we spent the first, 15 minutes or so just ragging Purdue, I'm going to go Jaden Ivey, number 1 on my ballot. He's just – there's nobody like him in college basketball. He makes winning plays all the time for a team that, yes, as we've discussed, has its flaws, but that a team that as of this moment is a top 5 team. And if I were voting on it now, I mean, he would be the guy. I'm kind of leaning towards wanting to see a guard win it this year because, the last 3 have been Garza, Obi Toppin, and Zion Williamson. All 3, deserving winners. But actually, you go back the last time a guard won it, it was Jalen Brunson, the year that Villanova won the national title. And so for that reason, my number 2 is Ochai Agbaji. And I know he's had some moments where he's kind of disappeared offensively in the last couple of weeks, but he's reached double figures in every game this season. And Kansas is a team that could maybe win the national championship, and he's a superstar for that team. So, I've got Kofi Coburn and Johnny Davis and Drew Timme rounding out my top 5, but I would probably go Ivy and Agbaji as my top 2 right now.
It's interesting because last week I made the point that I don't think there's a clear-cut favorite. Like sometimes by February, it is obvious who everybody should be voting National Player of the Year if the vote were happening in this moment. Zion Williamson was that. I think Luka Garza was probably that. I don't think we have that guy this season. Evidence being that your top 2 aren't even in my top 3. And it doesn't mean that your top 2 are crazy. It just means that there's not an obvious favorite at this point. And there's a lot of candidates. Jaden Ivey, Ochai Agbaji, Kofi Coburn.
Leaky Black.
Leaky Black, is an incredible perimeter defender and probably should that should be taken into account when you're discussing National Player of the Year candidates. But my top 3 aren't any of those players. My number 1 right now remains Oscar Tshiebwe. He's averaging at Kentucky 15.9 points and 15.1 rebounds in 30.3 minutes per game for a team I've got ranked 3rd in the top 25 and 1. So he's a statistical monster on a legitimate national title contender. He got 18 and 14 earlier this week at South Carolina. He's now number 1 in defensive rebounding percentage. And this surprised me because he has been number 1 in offensive rebounding percentage as well for much of the season, but he's now number 2 in offensive rebounding percentage. Trivia time. Which player is now ranked number 1 in offensive rebounding percentage according to KenPom?
Zach Edey.
He's, I think, 3rd. He's up there pretty high. David McCormack at Kansas is at 19.7%. Tshiebwe is at 19.4%. So he's not number 1 in both anymore, but he's number 1 in one and number 2 in the other. He's an incredible rebounder. So he would be my leader right now, but not by a wide margin. And there's a scenario where he might not even be in my top 3 next Friday, depending on how the next week unfolds. But right now, I would keep him where I had him last week, which is number 1. My number 2, Johnny Davis at Wisconsin. He's averaging 20.8 points, 8.2 rebounds, 2.5 assists for a team I got ranked 8th in the top 25 and 1. Patrick Herb, who is the director of brand strategy at Wisconsin, been working in the Wisconsin athletic department for a long time, like terrific guy. Great to work with. He sent a note along and had some really interesting statistical stuff connected to Johnny Davis. Wisconsin has played 7 games this season against teams that at the time of the game were ranked in the top 25 of the AP poll. And in those games, Johnny Davis is averaging 25.3 points, 8.6 rebounds. So he's, really playing incredibly well against the best competition. In Wisconsin's 3 biggest wins, so that's at Purdue, against Houston out in Las Vegas, and at Michigan, Johnny Davis was phenomenal. He had 37 points against Purdue, 30 against Houston, 25 at Michigan. And just for some context here, some of the other Player of the Year candidates that we've mentioned in games like this. So games against top 25 teams. Again, Johnny Davis is averaging 25.3 points, 8.6 rebounds, and Wisconsin has a 4-3 record in those games. Ochai Agbaji's averaging 20.8 points, and that's second most among the Player of the Year candidates in these types of games. And Kansas is 3-3 in those games. Drew Timme is averaging 20.4 points, 6.8 rebounds. Gonzaga'S 3-2 in those games. Kofi Coburn is averaging 19.5 and 9.3. That's good. Illinois is 1-3 against top 25 teams. Jaden Ivey 18.7, 5.8. Purdue is 5-1 in those games. And then Oscar Tshiebwe, 13.4 points, 14.6 rebounds, but Kentucky's only 2-3 in those games. So Johnny Davis is averaging nearly 5 points better than any other legitimate National Player of the Year candidate when playing against top 25 teams. So if you're somebody who likes, and for me, National Player of the Year comes down largely to you got to be a great player and you got to be on a good enough team. Like, if you're ranked 47th at KenPom, I don't really care what you're doing. You can be an All-American, but you're not going to be the National Player of the Year. You've got to be statistically good or great. You got to be on a good enough team. And if you want to add to that somebody who does it when the lights are on, somebody who does it against the best competition, if that is something that matters to you as a voter, well, then Johnny Davis is the best so far this season, when it comes to playing against other top 25 level schools. So I've got 1 Oscar Tshiebwe, 2 Johnny Davis, and then third, this is a new addition to my list, Chet Holmgren at Gonzaga. He's now averaging 14.6 points, 9.1 rebounds, 3.3 blocks in 25.5 minutes per game for a team that I now have ranked number 1 in the top 25-1. He's shooting 64.5% from the field, 46.5% from 3. His true shooting percentage is now up to 74.1. And I saw this from Jared Burson, who's a researcher at ESPN, who's a terrific follow, by the way, on Twitter, because he's got just every night just wild statistical stuff, historical context for what we're watching. I grab a lot of his notes and use them, which is why I wanted to give him credit. I'm not stealing from him. I'm just borrowing. Again, Jared Burson, a researcher for ESPN. Everything I'm about to tell you is stuff that I've read from his Twitter feed. But if Chet Holmgren were to finish the season at 74.1 true shooting percentage, it would be the second highest true shooting percentage by a Division I player in the past 30 seasons. I mean, we don't see stuff like this. Now, what's interesting is that what I just said is true, but there is a player who has a better true shooting percentage in college basketball this season. It's Keller Boothby at Cornell, who has a true shooting percentage right now of 76.6. So shouts to Keller Boothby. But Chet Holmgren is having a statistically great season. Here's another
Gary,
one.
what does Keller Boothby have to do to get on your top 5 for next week?
You know what? I had never heard of Keller Boothby until about 90 minutes ago when I was prepping for this. But now he's on my radar. So I'm going to keep trying.
I want to see Keller and Leaky Black get a little more love, okay?
Keller Boothby is a type of player. How about this? If Keller Boothby finishes the season with a better true shooting percentage than Chet Holmgren, he is under consideration for a lifetime shout out on the Eye on College Basketball podcast. That's the race I don't think people have been paying enough attention to this season. The Chet Holmgren Keller Boothby true shooting percentage race that is happening. That's unfolding a little off the radar, but it's on my radar now.
Is this an addition potentially, or is this at the peril of Leaky Black or Devin Downey?
No. I think once you get added to a consistent shout out on the Eye on College Basketball podcast, you are not replaced unless you disrespect us the way Terry Teagle once did. People sometimes ask, why does Terry Teagle not get the shout out at the end anymore? And it is because somebody sent us an interview that somebody did with Terry Teagle, the Baylor legend. And they said to him, so you get a shout out on the Eye on College Basketball podcast, CBS Sports, every episode. Did you realize that? And he said, no. He acted like he didn't know who we are. In fairness, he might not know who we are. Okay, that's fair. I understand, but I took that, as Michael Jordan might say, I took that personally, and so I'm not going to shout out Terry Teagle anymore because he publicly said he didn't even know that we existed. I found that to be disrespectful and insulting. So now, instead of Terry Teagle has been replaced, but he's been replaced by a different Baylor player every episode. I have the entire list of everybody who's ever played basketball at Baylor. And so instead of Terry Teagle, we just shout out another Baylor player at the end of every episode. So that's that.
Yeah. So if Keller Boothby finishes the season with a better true shooting percentage than Chet Holmgren and doesn't do anything crazy like speak ill of the Drew family or something like that.
That's right.
Then he'll be, commemorated henceforth.
There's no question. I give you my word. I don't always keep my word, but I'm going to try my best to keep it here. Keller Boothby finishes with a better true shooting percentage than Chet Holmgren and acknowledges our existence. He will get a permanent shout out on the Eye on College Basketball podcast. Back to Holmgren, another little thing Jared Burson tweeted, at some point in the past week or so. Chet had a 4-game stretch recently where he averaged 19.5 points, 10.3 rebounds, 3 3-pointers per game, and 3 blocks per game over a 4-game stretch. And that made him the first Division I player to average at least 15 points, 10 rebounds, 3 blocks, and 3 3-pointers in a 4-game span in the last decade. Again, with Holmgren, he's figured it out, and he is doing things that are, obviously uncommon. And we were in studio Wednesday night, Inside College Basketball on CBS Sports Network, and Adam Zucker, asked me if Drew Timme was still a, legitimate National Player of the Year candidate. And I said, well, of course. He's been terrific, but he might not be the best National Player of the Year candidate on his own team anymore. It might actually be Chet Holmgren. In my eyes right now, if I were picking one Gonzaga player to be National Player of the Year, I'd probably have to go with Chet Holmgren.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make the case that the two most important players in the country are Chet Holmgren and Walker Kessler, because those two players change the ceilings of what their teams can accomplish. Because if you go and look at Auburn as a defensive team with Walker Kessler versus Auburn as a defensive team without him, it's a massive difference. And it's the same with Gonzaga. And so I think in the end, maybe the Naismith voters would side more with Timme in some ways as a lifetime achievement award. Mm-hmm. And due to the points per game average likely being higher when it's all said and done than Holmgren's is. But I'm not going to argue with you on the importance of Chet Holmgren. And I think some people are going to discount some of these statistics that you're throwing out and some of these observations that you've made. And they're going to point to the caliber of competition as the reason why it shouldn't be, we shouldn't be touting Chet Holmgren's improvement. But I'm on board with the fact that I think he's figuring it out. And I think that will be evident when they reemerge, from WCC play, and whoever they play in the second round of the NCAA tournament in their first game against a, real legitimate team in a while. No offense, St. Mary's or San Francisco. I think that improvement will be on display, because I think it'll be a different Chet Holmgren than the one we saw against Alabama and Texas Tech and those other teams they played.
It is a fact that he is doing it against West Coast Conference competition. There's no other side to that. It's true. He is doing it against West Coast Conference competition. But BYU's good, and he's doing this against, the good West Coast Conference teams as well. Would he do exactly this in the Big Ten? I don't know, but I think he'd be great anywhere, obviously. Yeah. I think he'd be great anywhere. And either way, the point remains the same. Good players play in bad leagues all the time in college basketball. Great players playing bad leagues all the time in college basketball. And the West Coast Conference ain't as bad as it probably is perceived. There's some good teams in that league. They're going to get, maybe 3 or 4 teams in the NCAA tournament. He's the fact that he's doing things that have never been done in a decade or by any Division I player, or things that have only been done by one other player in the past 30 seasons. When you're doing historically great stuff like that, it means you're special. And he is so clearly special in what is going to be his one season of college basketball. Matt Norlander, by the way, has got a nice piece up on Chet Holmgren right now. If you haven't seen it, I believe it posted on Thursday. You can find it at cbssports.com. Before we get to the Final Four and 1, let me ask you a question. Are your go-to game day foods feeling uninspired? Next time, skip the usual suspects and order Jersey Mike's. At Jersey Mike's, they make every sub to order with premium fresh sliced meat, and cheesesteaks are cooked on a flat-top grill. Download their app for delivery, curbside, or in-store pickup. Jersey Mike's is a proud sponsor of the Naismith Award and a proud maker of a sub above.